Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. And I do have some slides that I'll be sharing with you all. I'm excited to be able to share this information because I think there's obviously a long history of work that we've all been doing together to really shift what's been happening in our communities for so long. So awesome. All right, here we go. Nice to see you, Joe Paul. It's been a
What's
second.
up, my sister? What's up, folks?
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to move through some things. There'll be some time where I just pause to see if there's questions, if there's any reflections. Yeah, I'll definitely pause as we move forward together today. So what I'm sharing with y'all today, community power in collective and equitable resourcing. I'm going to talk about ATI and beyond because there are some opportunities for us to really be thinking about as alternatives to incarceration builds up, but as the county also moves into a space where they're really thinking about justice, racial equity, health equity, and really attempting to prioritize Black and Brown communities. They always need more pressure. And there's some initiatives in place that are really lifting up the needs of our people. So I'll be speaking from the perspective of an LA County employee. I do work for the Department of Health Services. And I'm also a healing, health, and justice advocate. I am of the community, from the community. And to me, that is my top priority. So I'll be speaking from both of those perspectives and really be able to share what I know, what I have learned working in this system that I hope can support you all in moving forward and getting the resources that you deserve and that our communities need. So I'd love to just get to know you all for a second. So again, welcome. I do want to do some land acknowledgements. I do connect to my Indigenous roots. And we are on the land of the Tongva people, the Shoshone people, that have cultivated this land for us, that continue to cultivate this land for us. And many of us are Indigenous to the spaces and places that we have lived. Especially in Los Angeles. We have built Los Angeles through our labor, through our love, through the development of our families. So just acknowledging the Native people, acknowledging us that continue to build this land up. And for the intros, I'd love if you all can share your name, your organization, and just how you're incorporating healing in your life right now. I know there's a lot going on in our world. And a lot of my practice is really trying to focus on how we're both healing ourselves in this moment, but also as we heal ourselves, how we're healing the generations before us and the generations that are coming after us. So if you can put in the chat just your name, your organization, and how are you healing right now? What is keeping you rooted? What is keeping you grounded? Brad Carson, United Hood Nation. It is our time now. Yes, this is our time. Renee, Lionheart Community Development Corporation. Thank you for being here. Joe Paul, the faith that I have been placed on this planet by my creator to be a change agent. Yes, you have, Joe Paul. Give y'all a few more minutes. Don, Stewards for Health, Communities, and Families. I love that health is in your organization's mission and title. Nicole Banks, Los Angeles Metro Churches. Well, please keep on sharing your names. What is bringing you grounding and healing right now? LV, co-founder of On My Grind. I believe in bestowing value to the justice involved through career development. Thank you. A servant leader of prayer, Edie. Kenneth Carter, great to have you. Awesome. Well, please feel free to keep on using the chat to introduce yourselves and anything else that's coming up. Jabari, the needs of others, for sure. Keeps us going. Okay, so just some grounding today. This is a quote I've been sharing a lot in the presentations I share with folks, just because I know we're grounded already, but I'd love to ground us a little bit more so that we're moving in that energy today. Vineka, great to meet you. So if we treat liberation like a destination, like a place we can arrive at and then consider our work complete, we will rush towards it with little thought put into the steps we take. Or worse, we will leave the work of unlearning and healing for future generations to bear because we never grappled with the depth of our oppression. But if we treat liberation like a process that must always be cultivated, then we are tasked with building it into our everyday lives as something that must be practiced and nurtured. I know that the work that you all are doing is rooted in that vision and grounded in that vision. And so I hope that as I share information today, we can continue to build the container that connects to the process of liberation that we're cultivating on a daily basis for our people. So I hope that grounds us, and I will move us to the next slide. So today, our discussion. First, we'll be reflecting on the evolution to get to alternatives to incarceration. All of us have done a lot of work to get to this point. So I just want to give us some space to reflect on that and reflect on our contribution to actually get us to the place where we have a substantial roadmap that really expands diversion and alternatives. Then I'll do some remembering of how ATI was built. So I know you all have the report already, but I'll share a little bit about how the ATI work group actually developed this vision. And I'll also share some of the challenges and pitfalls that we had in there and the gaps that we still need to work on. And then finally, we'll do some revisiting of the opportunities to push and build now in LA County. So I'll share some current things that are happening within the county that I think will really support you all in your work and support you all in really being able to continue to build the resources within your communities that you already have been building. Are there any questions about that before I continue on?
No, this is great. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Cheryl. All right. So I'd love to just take some time to hear from you all. How do you think we got to ATI? What are things that you did in your work that contributed to us getting to an alternatives to incarceration vision for Los Angeles County? What got us here? And feel free to use the chat or take yourself off of mute, whichever feels good.
I think I'll kick it off since you all are trying to act shy. Come on, peace workers. I think from what I see was just the ongoing pressure of Black Lives Movement. The Black Lives Matter movement really kind of teed it up for the rest of us and got us over the finish line, if you will. So I think that was part of it in LA County. I think Mark Ridley Thomas, as a supervisor, he was a good voice in that. I don't know if he led a movement, but I think if he wasn't there, I don't know if we would have been able to get the 3 votes, you know. So I think that helped as well. the homeless situation getting way beyond out of control. I think that added to it even more. And the fact that those Skid Row advocates like Pete White's group and them, that they just wouldn't let it go either about the racial disparity, mostly being homelessness impacting Blacks the way that it does. So I think those three things, that's my opinion.
This is Hattie McFrazier.
Okay. Go ahead, Hattie.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Hattie.
Oh, what I would like to say, okay, all right, Twin. I can go further back than that. I think it's, if we look back at the data, starting way back in the 90s, looking at who are incarcerated. And I think a lot of reports have come out over the years discussing that. But what has happened in LA County is the fact that with the number of African Americans and people of color who are incarcerated, many there not because of the crime, but because of the fact they couldn't afford attorneys and what have you. And that looking at the fact that the jails, it was so political because it became a job force for incarcerating people. So I think that's where it started. And then as we moved on through the years, you had organization within the community, Black community as well as Hispanic community start crying out. The community started crying out, we need to do something about what's going on. Why are we incarcerating so many of our people? And then when it became a realization about the number of young people under 18 that was in juveniles and what incarcerated, then I think people started really looking at what we need to do. And then with the ongoing Black Lives Matter coming aboard, I think it's a combination of different groups crying out, trying to make sure that people are aware and educating people of what was going on. I think people were not being educated of what was happening in the system. And I think that made a difference.
Yes. I agree with you, Hattie. Educating ourselves, especially as Black youth back messing up. I think some of us, in a sense, made us aware of what we was doing to ourselves and what we had did to our community. We didn't understand the effects of trauma. How can you be influenced with trauma, not knowing that you actually are traumatized? And so with us being more educated on the things that was happening to us, it made us aware. And it made us accountable. And when we found out we was accountable, well, first of all, when God woke us up and we found out that we was accountable for our actions and the actions of our community, what we done to it, it was our duty to come back and do what's right, because we played a major part in the destruction of our communities, of the Black community. So we just trying to come back and get ourselves back grounded and put ourselves back in position to do what we should have been doing, for in the system that have been played upon us. So it's just us being educated more about who we are and not allowing somebody to tell us what's best for us, like we don't know what's best for us. So that I'm sick and tired of that, because we well aware of what we need and how it should go and how it should be for us in our communities. So that's all.
I'd like to share something.
Of course.
Yes, my name is Wineka Vaden. And I've been a product of being in and out of the prison system for over 17 years. I work with a group in Chowchilla called Girls Advocating Greatness. And I just see so much fairness, injustice, and disparity that we're facing. And so what I see now when I came home from prison is these people had lack of resources, information, or whatever else. And so just hearing some of the stories with the ladies in the prison, we went out there to visit them last year, and it's just devastating that they're in there right now dealing with, I know that they're working on the COVID-19, but I get letters every day just telling, and they crying out for help, no lack of resources or whatever else. So I'm here to just try to make sure that we make a difference, fight for justice and change. Then I look at the homeless situation. I look at this dilapidation in our community, and it's sad that we sit around here with all these people living on the street when all this money has been passed, and we still have people laying out on the street, hungry, no food. And it's just too much financial disparity that's transpiring in our community that we need to stand accountable for and bring justice where it's being acknowledged.
This is Brad Carson. I'd like to jump in there too, as far as reflecting on the evolution to get to alternatives to incarceration. You know, we have been here on this planet, on this continent, for 400 plus years of structural, systemic, institutionalized racism. So to say that Black Lives Matter as a movement, it's been over 400 plus years. With that said, in my lifetime, being born and raised right here in Los Angeles and being a professional as a probation officer, in my estimation, it really started, not started, but as I reflect on it, Father Greg Boyle had taglined the phrase jobs and not jails. And then the Crips and Bloods got together through at Jim Brown's house. By 1992, they did the whole gang truce. For lack of a better term, the Mexican gangs got together and did a gang truce. And then in 1993 and 94, both the Blacks and the Browns did a gang truce in Venice, Oakwood. With that said, in 1990, a group of California inmates sued the state of California, saying that it was cruel and unusual punishment to be in an overcrowded prison. It went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court agreed and said to the state of California 20 years later, so we're in 2010 now, that unless the state of California prison system reduces their 200% capacity, overcapacity, then that there be in receivership. And so the state of California did not want to be in receivership. And so they changed the laws to stop incarcerating people and start incentivizing particularly the probation departments throughout the state of California, and in my particular case, the LA County Probation Department, to stop sending people to prison. So that's one way to reduce the overcrowded prison population, is to incentivize jobs and education to overcome crime and poverty and to stop sending people to prison in the first place. And then with the further movements of Mark Ridley Thomas, as it was stated earlier, on his way out, he had nothing, in my opinion, no political, well, let me go back to where I met Joe Paul. So
okay, I'm going to give you
when the churches,
like one more,
particularly the mega churches.
if there are other folks that want to share, I want to give them space to share.
No problem. I'll close up in 30 seconds. In 1998, the mega Black churches got together. Bishop from City of Refuge held a ex-offender job fair, and Bishop Noel Jones called up Bishop Blake, Bishop Ulmer, Bishop McClendon. We got the first AME, the second AME, the Black Baptist ministers all together, and they signed a petition. And I think that really and started doing ex-offender job fairs. I think that really turned the tide in 1998 as far as the evolution to get alternatives to incarceration for holding ex-offender job fairs at mega Black churches. I'll end with that.
Thank you, Brad. I'm sure you have a lot more history to share with us. Thank you for sharing those pieces. Is there anyone else that wants to reflect on their experience of how they contributed to get us to the ATI?
Yes, I would like to reflect on my experience. I served 33 years in prison. I went in as a juvenile, and at the time in the 80s and 90s, with all the truth in the sentencing and all the different laws, it was like a suppression. And we fought hard in institutions to liberate ourselves and to create opportunities for other people coming home. And from the inside, you know, having housing and having employment, it's the values that men and women really can appreciate paroling and coming home. So I done dedicated my life into making sure that when men and women come home, that they are given opportunity to advance in the career of their choice and to bring value to themselves and their communities. So, you know, it's been a real hard struggle. I get letters from people all the time. I get mail from people saying they really appreciate what we're doing out here and they recognize the work that's being done. And I feel good about the work we're doing. And we still got a long way to go.
I have something to say. It's going to be brief. I'm thinking about on the federal level. I have two loved ones that have been incarcerated for 26 years. And I can say like the first 13 years, I was just floating in the abyss of not knowing myself with the education. And as time went on, I became more educated, and then education leads to empowerment. And for me on a federal level, when it really made a shift and the mindset went to, you know, we are incarcerating people, especially on the federal level, from the war on drugs in the 1990s when they just started like picking everybody up and they were going to jail for distribution of sales. But it was Michelle, I cannot think of her last name right now, but she wrote that book. You know, with the book that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. When she wrote that book and that book came out, it was just like an explosion of agencies that were now focused on mass incarceration on a federal level. And it seems to me, because I'm here in California, and most of the agencies are in DC or on the East Coast of New York, some, you know, over there. But they're not really connected to the families that are really dealing with their loved ones that are incarcerated, or they seem to pick the things that can be easily overturned and not going after the ones that really needs that support to change these laws. They want to grab the ones that are obtainable and then like, okay, like they're scared to, but then move on forward. But that's what I'm thinking about. So I know here we're talking about on the local level, but I was just thinking about on the federal level because that's where I deal with more with my loved ones.
Thank you, Dawn. Thanks for bringing that in. Yes, it's The New Jim Crow by Maria.
Yes, yes,
and I totally agree. I think that was another pivotal point for our movement as well when, you know, she created that book and it kind of pushed us in a particular way. So thank you everyone for reflecting on that. And I do that because, you know, we've all contributed to this movement. And we all have our own unique experiences that allow this movement to actually happen the way that it did and to get us to the point of ATI. I also just want to say I appreciate Winnetka and Alvi for really sharing your direct experience within the system, and just want to lift that up and send some love to you all for really lifting that up, that experience up. So I'm going to share a little bit, but I do think even a lot of what Brad said is true. You know, there has been evolutions and years of work and labor that has gone into getting us to ATI. And I'll just share some kind of key pieces that I do think push the county to actually move ATI forward. The first piece is, you know, we had been in a push to end a $3.7 billion jail plan in Los Angeles County. This came at the heels of realignment, the policy that Brad was talking about. So I think many of you all know, because, you know, the state prison system was under a lawsuit because of inhumane medical and mental health care inside of the prisons, that generated public safety realignment in 2011. Which shifted people. It didn't release people. A lot of the mainstream media says it released people. It shifted people from after 2011. If you were convicted of a nonviolent, non-serious, non-sexual offense, you would serve your time in county jail as opposed to state prison. if you were coming out of state prison after 2011 for those particular offenses, you would now be on county probation instead of state parole. So it shifted responsibility and it shifted resources, including resources to build jails and or to support community interventions. Years went by where people were fighting against the jail plan. And, you know, in 2019, 2018, we finally saw that the Board of Supervisors said no to the $3.7 billion jail plan. And that then created, that also then pushed the Board of Supervisors to create the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group. And so that's a very brief synopsis of some of the key pieces that came up there, but that's kind of some of the policy stuff that I think got us here. So remembering how ATI was built. So I'm just going to give you all a brief overview of how we built the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group. And I say we because this was really a collective effort. I will say, like, I co-led the process and shepherded the process, but we had thousands of people that were a part of this process. So it was co-created amongst community. The ATI mission was really to provide the LA County Board of Supervisors a roadmap with an action-oriented framework and implementation plan to scale alternatives to incarceration and diversion. So care and services are provided first and jail is a last resort. One of the key things we did at the beginning, and this was kind of connected to, you know, values. Some folks have put the need for values in the chat. So for ATI, we generated 3 values, which were equity and racial justice, inclusion of many voices, and human first language. Those were the values that kind of guided the development. This is kind of what the ATI work group structure looked like. It still somewhat looks like this, but it's a different kind of framework now. But you can see in order to create the recommendations, we had 5 different subcommittees or ad hoc committees here, and they all created the recommendations. We ended up with 114 recommendations, and those 114 recommendations went to the ATI voting members and the ATI chair for consensus. And so for 114 recommendations, there was some level of consensus that was developed in order to move them forward to the Board of Supervisors and the Chief Executive Office. And so this is just a little bit about the ATI process. These are some of the ATI voting members, but you can see just how many people were engaged, how many meetings we had. We did have a racial equity retreat, and we had a retreat to address the voices of survivors and victims of harm. And so these were a lot of the pieces that kind of came together for us to then develop the final report that you all have access to. So again, we reached consensus on 114 plus recommendations. And this was across county departments and across community representatives. All right. I'll just share a little bit about how those recommendations were developed, and then I'll pause to see if there's any questions about this part.
Oh, what a fantastic group. I think we should get started. Everyone, that's here, and as people come.
Hi, Reginald. Can you put yourself
My
on?
name is Beth Peterson. I work with LA Commons.
Thank you. So all of the recommendations were developed through this ATI Intercept roadmap. The ATI Intercept roadmap was actually modeled off of a behavioral health intercept that had been created at the state level to support people with mental health needs that were involved in the justice system and needed services instead. So we attempted to update this ATI Intercept roadmap to actually start thinking about what recommendations we currently had that we were generating within the ATI and what our communities potentially needed. It's not a perfect intercept, but this is what we created to develop recommendations across each of the areas that somebody may get connected to the criminal justice system. And so, and also thought about prevention. So you could see Intercept 0 was all about holistic, decentralized, community-based system of care. And this was prevention and reentry. This is where we did talk about issues of violence, issues of restorative justice, issues of, preventing mental health or substance use crisis. So a lot of the recommendations in this section are likely recommendations that connect to your organizations. Additionally, I think Intercept 1 would be interesting for you all as well, because this was really the community response and intervention services. So when an actual crisis happened, what types of, the recommendations here were focused on what types of services were needed in the community to intervene and support someone when a crisis did happen. And so this was before law enforcement was called. So some of these recommendations may be in connection with your work as well. And then the second intercept was about law enforcement. So this was like when law enforcement is called because there's a crisis, what happens and what can we do to divert people and give someone an alternative and bring them back to Intercept 0, the holistic, decentralized, community-based system, okay? And the intercept process goes on. So booking and first court appearance, again, what can we do to get them back to 0? Jail custody and processes. How can we employ, diversion opportunities like the Office of Diversion and Reentry have? How can we do pre-plea diversion? So that people aren't having to plead guilty to get services and bring them back again to Intercept 0. And then 5, pre-release and release, looking at programs like care transitions, which we can refer people to inside of the jail so that when they are released, they're getting coordinated services or connected to services in some way. So recommendations like that exist in Intercept 5. And then finally 6, supervision in the community. So that is how we're reforming probation practices in order for people to to feel like supervision is not as obtrusive. And so recommendations in here that existed were like reducing the amount of probation time that people have, reducing the amount of times that people have to check in with probation, even, shifting that to check-ins over the phone, which ended up being implemented at the onset of COVID by the probation office. And then finally, infrastructure at the end. So you got all these wonderful things going on, but how do you coordinate it all? We all know that when we try to access county services, it's difficult because nobody talks to each other. Nobody's coordinating with each other. And so infrastructure was really an attempt to figure out how we were going to develop an accountability mechanism that was really coordinating all of these resources so that there were real public communication and accountability structures and access points for our folks to be aware of what was existing, okay? In here, you'll also see org capacity building and changing contracting practices, equitable resource distribution. That was a big part of the ATI, that the communities, whether that's by race, geography, gender, sexual orientation, that have been most impacted by incarceration are the communities that the resources should be funneled to. So that was a big part of a lot of the recommendations we had in this report. So I'm going to pause there. I know I just shared a lot of information, so just want to pause to see if folks have any questions, reactions to this.
I love the facts, Diana, and it really helps because when you say that thousands of people participated and you have over 100 recommendations, then that's where we want to know, how come we weren't there? How come we didn't know about this?
Yeah.
Like that, and that's for us to look at. It's double-sided, guys. So we need to ask ourselves that as well. Not now, but that's part of the reason I wanted to invite someone like Diana, because she understands, but I wanted her to tell the story as the perspective of the county. That they had all these meetings. They have over 6 key intercepts in a roadmap. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we feel about, how do we get our input in there? Why weren't we there? So many things to uncover. And that's the reality that we got to deal with. That's the hurdle to build our capacity. If we're not in these places, that's why we don't get anything. That's why you're not mentioned. That's why a lot of things. So we're going to dive into these details, which is why the CAP, part of what we're branding is your ability to be a critical thinking group collectively as community justice advocates, community health advocates, racial justice advocates, all that, because we're going to have to dig in on this and understand, and then we can make decisions about where to connect and plug in. But so important. I wanted to just thank you, Diana. You are still so amazing to me.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Amazing. A lot of work went into this community. CAP members, I also want to kind of highlight that and what it takes to get us past this next level of change.
Definitely. I think I see Haiti here.
Somebody's got a hand up. Oh, okay, yes. Hi, Hattie. Go ahead, speak, please.
Yeah, I'm looking at this roadmap, and I'm also looking at, first of all, were most of the individuals who made up this panel, were they employees of the county, or was it a percentage of people from the community? Because I see some people on there that are county people, the pictures that you just showed. So that's why I was wondering.
Definitely. I'll go back to the picture. So it was 15 because the board wrote the motion and we had to adhere to what the board said in the motion. We had 15 county departments represented and 10 community representatives. So the voting membership, this isn't even all the full voting members, to be honest. The voting membership was one representative from each of the 15 county departments that were named in the motion, and then 10 representatives from the community, and those were distinguished by the Board of Supervisors. So that's how the voting membership was created. But if you see here, these pieces over here, the community-based system of care, et cetera, those ad hoc committees, and even our larger meetings, those were open to the general public. And these ad hoc committees, they're actually the ones that created the recommendations. I would say from these ad hoc committees, more than half of the people there were community representatives, were formerly incarcerated people and or families of people that were incarcerated, had been or currently are. So that is how we structured it. However, it's imperfect, you know what I mean? And I think what Cheryl brings up is true. Like, I think about like, why didn't I call you, Cheryl, and be like, hey, where are your people? And these county processes get so busy that they take from you sometimes. And that's the real honest truth. That is something that I'll share next about what the opportunities are now. But there is a need to both communicate with each other about what those opportunities are and preserve our energy as well. Because I will say this process was so hard. It was literally people were meeting on their own time 2-3 times a week for hours to get these recommendations done. And then another 2-hour meetings to get the voting memberships to pass the recommendations. Not to mention the advocacy that had to happen between the community and the county to get those votes to pass some of these really, I would say, radical recommendations. So it's not a perfect structure. We can improve for sure. And those are some of the reflections I have about the challenges and how we could be better.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you. I see some chats. Okay, yes, thanks, Cheryl. You can see all the organizations that participated. We did name all of the orgs in the report.
Yeah, it's in the chats, folks. I just wanted to remind you, and I'll have Patty and everybody resend it out, and Ken will get these documents up on the CAP website too for the organizations too, because we got to have our source documentation. We're gonna push back and ask questions, then we want to be informed. And again, I can't thank Diana enough for coming to spend this time, break it down, like I said, in regular English, and she did, got right to it. And because we're all here anyway, we understand, but it raises so many questions for me is, how do we bring the smaller organizations, the organizations that participated by demographics, their budgets tend to be $10 million a year or above. And they are far more professionalized as an organization. And so to look at it like trying to make it positive, we have to find a way to negotiate and clarify what is the lane for these constituent-driven organizations. These are people that were in the system and evolved to leading. They've participated in the civic engagement that's often connected to the reentry services back home, that many of those hardworking nonprofit leaders, they're just like us, they're just at the other end of the spectrum that they've put together. So they've been trained to participate in community organizing. And that's what we're trying to have an intelligent analysis about. We have some feelings about that, but we're trying to practice all the good things we've been taught, practicing our trauma, healing and breathing, because it is imperfect. And even if we acknowledge that out loud, that will help to draw us in so that we can start working to figure out how do we fit in? These are some fundamental system changes as well that we can try to negotiate at this time. There needs to be in the SBA, and this is my last comment on that. I want to give others time. They have a program. I learned about this since COVID, so I didn't know this last year, but they have a distinct category for micro and mini businesses. And when I thought about it by comparison, after reading these reports that started coming to me this year, I said, hey, we don't have such a thing in our nonprofit sector. And that's, I think, Diana, is where I wanted to ask you to co-think with me. I trust you because you've been on the side of the table where I'm at now. And now you're on the other side of the table. So you know what that means. So, and me representing community, us representing community, you, Joe, we're working more with the institution. This is where our best, if we got game, we got to come with it right now from each interest. And that's where I'm calling on you and Joe to help us figure out how do we create that lane. We don't want to change anything. We don't want to get rid of anything. We need a bigger plate. You guys just need a bigger plate to make room for us, because with COVID exposed, we're on the front end, we're on the streets. Those $10 million nonprofits, they couldn't pivot in a crisis. They couldn't just adapt and meet the moment. And so that's not even a value judgment. It's just the system we have. So when you go back to that tenant, it's like, we don't want it to be so reactionary. When I was getting calls from all my friends in public health, because all my friends are working in public health now. So yes, you guys are calling me. What do we do? What do we do? We're putting this together, but our folks are not recognized by the system. So that's where I think if we work from that place of how do we increase the table and create a lane for small nonprofits, less than that 10 million, and even smaller than that, like 1 million, 2 million or less, 500,000. There should be different criteria. They can't afford, what's that thing, the umbrella insurance policy. You can't get a deal with the county without that.
Well, let's get into that next, Cheryl. So I'm going to talk next about the pushing and the building now.
Okay.
What the opportunities are, because I think we have until 10:30. Am I right?
Yes. We have till 10:30, and we'll have you back at your, once we digest all this.
For sure. So I just share this really beautiful visual. So we did do community engagement in 7 highly impacted communities, and actually gave small grants to smaller organizations to organize the community engagement process in their neighborhood. So that was one of the things that we did, and we worked with our community engagement ad hoc committee to collectively decide through consensus who those agencies were going to be. So again, a space that I would have loved y'all to be a part of. And this is what we did. And this is one visual of all of the points of feedback that came up. And this was at the Community Coalition event. And we had a graphic note taker that kind of identified all these pieces.
It's so beautiful.
Right?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So here is one of the pieces that I think is going to be of interest to you all. So aside from stopping the $3.7 billion jail plan, creating the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group, what also happened, the board passed a motion to close Men's Central Jail. And so right now I'm a part, along with, a lot of county and community folks, not as much as it should be, but a part of the Men's Central Jail Closure Work Group. And so this work group is really, has a few different tasks. So they have a few different committees. One committee is around data and facilities, which is really looking at the actual numbers of people inside of the Men's Central Jail and how many folks need to be diverted, how many folks potentially need to be moved to other jails in order for us to close Men's Central Jail. There's another group that's working on programs, which actually Troy Vaughn is a part of that group. And they're really looking at what capacity needs to be built in the community in order for us to be able to do that. And then on my end, because the county doesn't really always think about community engagement, racial equity, and in this case, participatory budgeting, I created with a colleague and the Reentry Health Advisory Collaborative, just created a community engagement and racial equity advisory group to ensure that the county, through the Men's Central Jail Work Group, is looking at how to ingrain racial equity in whatever recommendations are prioritized to close Men's Central Jail, including the community engagement that we've already done, where folks told us what they want and what they need. And also beginning the conversation around how we get the county to move into participatory budgeting, which, if folks don't know too much about participatory budgeting, this has been done in other states, in other counties, in other countries, where the government decides to give a pot of funding to community so that community can figure out how they want to distribute that funding and what they want to do with that funding in order to answer a concern in the community. So we're beginning to pull together a draft participatory budgeting process that the county can learn from so that we're engaging more people. And yes, this is something that the CAP and so many others need to be a part of once we get the county to do this. So just again about the work products that we are looking at for CERI is what we call it, the Community Engagement and Racial Equity Advisory Group for the Men's Central Work Group. I know there's a lot of moving pieces, but we're looking at elevating the community engagement that we've already done through the ATI process that I spoke about, including a phase 2 community engagement that we did, because when we went the first time to community was basically like, you always come to us and ask us what we need, but you never come back and let us know what you did with that information. So we actually did that. We provided small grants to the same organizations that did the first phase of community engagement. And we asked them to have, at this point, it had to be a virtual event because COVID had happened. And we updated them on what the county was doing, as well as created a space and container for us to talk about how we were feeling and what was going on for us, because we were both dealing with the pandemic and the social uprisings that were happening at that moment. So it was a beautiful process for us to actually do that and come back to community and say, this is what we did with the information. And one of the other questions I asked them at this point, because we knew we were going to close Men's Central Jail, was what would you build instead of the jail, instead of Men's Central Jail? Like, what would you build on that land instead? So we have that feedback too from the community that is inside the Men's Central Jail report. And folks said things like, you know, a full service building with a continuum of care that could be placed there, housing, you know, gardens, all the things. Definitely open to sharing that with you all, and I can put it in the chat once we finish. And then racial equity activities. Here I really work with my colleagues, Diamond Lee, who's also within Department of Health Services, and Kiwan Yu, who's within Correctional Health. And we're basically leveraging the data that we are receiving from Correctional Health to really pinpoint what the racial equity gaps are and what early release strategies that the system used when COVID hit should be expanded in order for us to address those racial equity issues. And so pretrial is a big one. It's been a big one for a while. $0 bail and stipulated releases are the ones that we're focusing on. And then finally, the participatory budgeting stuff. We are partnering with the Participatory Budgeting Project. They are an organization that's based in Oakland, but does participatory budgeting work in the United States and in Canada. So they're actually helping us create some goals, some principles, some roles, and a process to fully integrate community engagement and racial equity into a participatory budgeting practice that can hopefully be inserted into our county budget process, so that it's not just like a one-off, so that it is that whenever the county gets access to resources that connect to justice issues, this participatory budgeting process is employed to ensure that our community is actually providing input and saying where we want the resources to go, okay? So I'm just gonna share this piece and then I'll stop for questions because I know I'm sharing a lot, but I'm trying to get us to 10:30.
I mean, talk about a boss lady, y'all. Ooh, I want to participate in the budgeting process. We want to get our CAPs involved. That's awesome. Diana, you are still amazing.
Of course. Thanks, Cheryl. I appreciate you. Just trying to do what we know needs to happen.
Well, we want to be involved. We've got to take a look at our process and talk with our county partners and figure out what happened to us, you know, and so that this doesn't happen again. And then, you know, figure out how do we connect and plug ourselves, because as a CAP, as a community, as unincorporated leaders, we're ready and have a foundation. The Westmont CAP in that area has been established since 2015. And the Willowbrook since 2017. So these are some of the highest, even still, you know, gun violence and violence. And so it's a unique and exacerbating situation, you know, and we need more eyes on it. You know that we've been talking about this since 2013. So that's always my challenge. If they can fix things over on 80 something in Vermont, then I just challenge them that bring that best practice, come on down a little more southeast a little bit and apply that best practice here, and then we'll co-sign with you on that. But that's still not happening, Diana. We understand best practices, lack of investment, leadership, interest, system champions to apply it in areas where we live, work, worship. It's just not happening. I'm here in front of my friends telling you it doesn't happen. That's the call to action. We need an investment in these unincorporated areas with the unincorporated area leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And we can support this plan. Is sound, it's reasonable. It looks like you've done all the things you need to do. I just don't know. And some of you can help. How do we explain and define our role in this overall system when you all have organized a complete inclusive community plan without our interests and voices represented? So I'm less angry or pissed off and far more curious what happened here.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a collective responsibility that needs to be thought about because, you know, a lot of what was happening with ATI was, you know, folks being able to share with their community what was going on. The Board of Supervisors tapping the people that they're connected to also be a part of the process. So, you know, these county departments also tapping the organizations they're working with to be a part of the process. So I feel like there was outreach happening on all these levels, but it fell short, you know? And I think the stuff that I've laid out here, I think are other opportunities that the county is working on to be able to elevate, you know, your concerns.
Okay.
And so I just want to share that, like, you know, Measure J is happening. Obviously, we probably all voted to pass that. That is the measure that moves 10% of the general fund into alternatives to incarceration, youth development, housing, et cetera. And so these are all the opportunities to actually influence what's happening with Measure J. The first one is, you know, this is more from the community, Reimagine LA Coalition. They are the ones that kind of focused on passing Measure J.
Okay. Can we put that in the chat so we can, it's hard for me to copy it from the screen.
Yeah.
Let's see. Or just send it to me later then, and we'll make sure we share these so we can get there and do this. Looks like you got a survey too.
Yeah, so I just pulled together all of the resources that I know are happening right now based on Measure J, based on the ATI unit, and then the DPH Office of Violence Prevention that I know you all are connected to. But I will just say, like, Measure J right now is having the last few county Measure J subcommittee meetings. And pretty much this was a similar process, you know, where the Board of Supervisors designated who was going to be a part of the Measure J steering committee. And then there were a few folks with lived experience that were voted onto that steering committee. And then they created subcommittees for the community to actually be involved. So it's, again, another imperfect process, but I think this is a space to lift up your concerns. And you can find all of the meetings there. The other thing is County Measure J, ATI, and Alternative Crisis Response Calendar. So this is a calendar where you will see all of the meetings that the county is having on Measure J for the Alternatives to Incarceration unit and to get updates on that. And then also for the alternative crisis response work that DMH is leading.
Okay.
That is also going to have to create a whole group of community organizations that are ready and willing to connect to folks that are in crisis.